The inheritance tax loophole. That cost her everything. I sat beside Dad's bed, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. 5 years. That's how long I'd been his caregiver, putting my life on pause while the rest of the world moved on without me. The hospice nurse had left an hour ago, telling me it wouldn't be much longer. I held his hand, feeling the papery texture of his skin, and wondered if he knew I was there. The house was silent except for the hum of the oxygen machine. I'd given up my apartment, my dating life, even turned down a promotion at the tax consulting firm to be here. Every morning I made his breakfast. Every night I helped him into bed. My friends stopped calling after the first year. They didn't understand why I stayed, but he was my father, and when Mom died, I'd promised her I'd take care of him, so I did, alone. The front door slammed 2 days after Dad passed. I looked up from the kitchen table where I'd been staring at funeral arrangements I couldn't afford, and there stood Vivian. My older sister wore a designer coat that probably cost more than my car payment. Her perfume hit me before her words did. "God, this place still smells like a hospital," she said, wrinkling her nose. She hadn't visited in over a year, not even a phone call on Dad's birthday. Now she strutted through the living room, touching furniture like she was appraising it. "The property's worth what now?" $2 million, she asked casually. I felt my jaw tighten. "Hello to you too, Vivian." She barely glanced at me. "We need to talk about logistics. The estate, splitting things fairly. Fairly." The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Mr. Finch's office smelled like old leather and expensive wood polish. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I must inform you that your father made a last-minute change to his will." My stomach dropped. Vivian sat beside me, perfectly still, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. "The original will divide the estate equally between you both," Mr. Finch continued. "However, 3 weeks before his passing, your father signed a codicil." He slid the document across his desk. My eyes scanned the words, but they didn't make sense. The $15 million estate, the house, the investment portfolio, everything went to Vivian. 100%. My name appeared only once, in a clause stating I was to receive nothing. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. Vivian caught me in the parking lot. She pulled me into a hug that felt rehearsed, mechanical. "I know this is hard," she whispered against my ear, "but Dad told me he wanted me to handle the money. He said you were too soft to manage it properly." I stepped back, searching her face for any sign of remorse. Nothing. Just that practiced sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. 5 years, Vivian. I gave up everything. She sighed like I was being dramatic. "And those were your choices, Audrey. Dad appreciated your care, but he trusted me with his legacy." The words hit like physical blows. Too soft, not trusted, appreciated but not valued. She climbed into her luxury car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with my grief and shock turning into something darker, colder. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was packing up Dad's medications. Vivian's voice came through, bright and careless. "So I'm looking at penthouses downtown. There's this incredible place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. I heard traffic in the background, the clink of coffee cups. She was at a cafe, living her best life." "That's nice," I managed. "Seriously, Audrey, you should be grateful for the memories instead of the money. I mean, isn't that what caregiving is about? Love, not profit?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "I'm spending mine on a new life. New business venture, new everything. Dad would want me to live big." Something inside me crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear as ice. She thought I was soft. She thought I'd just accept this. I ended the call without responding. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked older than my 32 years. Dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in the same ponytail I'd worn for 5 years. But my expression had changed. The grief was still there, buried deep, but on the surface was something new. Focus. Cold, clear, unwavering focus. Vivian believed I was too soft for money. She thought caregiving made me weak. What she didn't know was that weakness and intelligence weren't opposites. Neither were kindness and cunning. I'd spent 5 years being the good daughter, the dutiful sister. Now I would be something else entirely. I would prove that being underestimated was the best weapon a person could have, and I would make sure Vivian never enjoyed a single dollar of that inheritance. Monday morning, I walked into Sterling and Associates, the tax consulting firm where I'd worked before becoming Dad's caregiver. My boss, Mr. Hendricks, looked up in surprise. "Audrey? I thought you were on extended leave." I'd called ahead, asked for my job back. They'd kept my position open, mostly out of pity. "I'm ready to return," I said. He nodded slowly. "We've got a new client. High net worth individual, complex estate planning, right up your alley." As I reviewed the files that afternoon, something clicked. My entire career had been built on this: moving money, protecting assets, understanding tax structures so complex that most people never saw them coming. I knew how to shelter wealth from the IRS, which meant I also knew how to expose it to catastrophic taxes. Vivian had handed me $15 million to weaponize. I called Vivian that evening, keeping my voice professional and concerned. "Hey, I've been thinking about the estate. Have you consulted with a tax specialist?" Silence on the other end. Then, "Why would I need that?" Perfect. She hadn't thought past the dollar signs. "The property and investment portfolio are complex assets," I explained patiently. "If you liquidate them wrong, you could lose millions to capital gains taxes. I'm talking $7, maybe $8 million. I heard her sharp intake of breath. "What?" "That's insane. It's the law. But there are ways to defer it, legal structures that protect high-value estates. I deal with this stuff every day at work. I could help you if you want." The pause stretched long. "Fine. When can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop near her new apartment. Vivian arrived 15 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors and checking her phone constantly. "This better be quick," she said. "I have investors to meet." I spread the documents across the table. The estate includes rental properties, stocks, bonds, and the house. If you sell any of it within the first year, you're looking at maximum capital gains exposure. She leaned forward, greed flickering across her face. "And you can fix this?" "There's a legal vehicle called a Legacy Asset Deferral Trust. It's designed specifically for estates like Dad's. You transfer the assets into the trust, and it defers all taxes for 18 months. Her eyes narrowed. "What's the catch?" "No catch, just patience. You can't touch the money for 18 months. I watched her carefully. Vivian's impatience was immediate and obvious. 18 months? That's ridiculous. I need capital now for my business venture. I kept my expression neutral, sympathetic even. "I understand, but think about it. Would you rather have $8 million in 18 months or lose half the inheritance to taxes right now?" She drummed her fingers on the table, that tell she'd had since childhood. "Can't we just pay the taxes and move on?" "You could, but you'd be throwing away millions. The LED Trust is completely legal, government approved. I've set up dozens of these for clients. It works." I slid the information packet toward her. "Take it home, read through it, think it over." She grabbed the packet without looking at it. "Fine. Set it up. But 18 months, Audrey, not a day longer." Over the next 2 weeks, I crafted the most beautiful trap of my career. The Legacy Asset Deferral Trust was real, technically legal, and absolutely devastating when misused. I spent hours on the phone with Vivian, explaining the tax savings in mind-numbing detail. Depreciation schedules, stepped-up basis calculations, IRC Section 1031 considerations. I made it so boring, so technical, that her eyes glazed over every time we talked. The 18-month holding period is mandatory under IRS regulations, I repeated constantly. It's just a minor hiccup for massive savings. She yawned through most of our conversations, always trying to rush me along. Perfect. The more bored she got, the less she questioned, the less she read, the less she understood what she was actually signing. The documents arrived via courier on a Thursday. 97 pages of legal language, trust provisions, and tax code references. Buried on page 83 was a single-page addendum titled Early Liquidation Provisions. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Any withdrawal before the 18-month mark triggered a 90% penalty on the withdrawn amount, not 90% taxes, a 90% penalty on top of taxes. It was legal, barely, hidden in a clause about trust preservation mechanisms and statutory penalty assessments. Vivian's lawyer would catch it if he read carefully, but Vivian never had lawyers read carefully. She skimmed, she rushed, she trusted her instincts over due diligence. We met at Mr. Finch's office to sign. Vivian flipped through the pages, barely glancing at the words. This is the tax saver thing? Exactly, I confirmed. She signed with a flourish. The money transferred into the LAD trust on a Monday morning. $15 million locked behind an 18-month timer. Vivian called me that afternoon, her voice bright. It's done? The money's safe? Completely protected, I assured her. Now we just wait. But Vivian couldn't wait. She called every few days, asking if there was any way to speed up the process. Could we get IRS approval early? Could we move just a little bit? Each time, I calmly reminded her of the holding requirement. These things are rigid, Viv. The IRS doesn't bend on time frames. I could hear her frustration building. Good. Impatience was her fatal flaw, and I'd built her a trap that specifically punished it. All I had to do now was wait for her to spring it herself. Vivian's new business launched with a party I saw on social media. Zenith Anti-Gravity Yoga promised a revolutionary fitness experience combining suspension equipment with meditation. The studio looked expensive, all white marble and gold fixtures. Her Instagram showed champagne toasts and celebrity appearances. I did some research. The equipment alone cost $300,000. The lease was astronomical, and the reviews were brutal. Overpriced, gimmicky, injured my back. Within 3 weeks, the studio was hemorrhaging money. Vivian posted less frequently. The bright enthusiasm faded from her updates. I watched from a distance, making calculations. She'd need cash soon, and there was only one place she could get it. The trap was set. Now I just needed her to step into it. The call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Vivian's voice was shrill, panicked. Audrey, I need your help. The yoga studio needs emergency equipment repairs, $300,000, and I need it by Friday. I sat up in bed, turning on the lamp. Vivian, that's a lot of money. I know, but it's in the trust, right? Just transfer it out. I'll pay it back. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. The trust has holding requirements, remember? We talked about this. I don't care about requirements, she shouted. This is my inheritance. My money. Figure out how to get it out. There are penalties for early withdrawal, I said carefully. How much? It depends on various factors. Let me review the documents. I paused. Vivian, I really wouldn't recommend this. We met the next morning at my office. I spread the trust documents across my desk, pretending to study them carefully. Okay, so technically you can withdraw funds early, but there's a penalty structure. Vivian leaned forward. How much? The documents reference a steep penalty for premature liquidation. It's vague, probably a standard fee, maybe 10 or 15%. I was lying. I knew exactly what the penalty was. But I kept my language ambiguous, letting her impatience fill in the blanks. So I'd get, what, $250,000 instead of $300,000? Something like that, I said vaguely. But Vivian, I really think you should wait. The full 18 months will save you millions. She stood up. Process the withdrawal. I'll pay the small penalty. I need the cash now. I processed the withdrawal request on Wednesday morning. The trust mechanism worked exactly as designed. $300,000 liquidated from the trust. The 90% penalty clause activated automatically. Taxes and fees processed through. By Thursday afternoon, the wire transfer hit Vivian's account, $30,000. I waited for the phone call. It came at 4 p.m. Audrey, Vivian screamed, nearly burst my eardrum. There's been a mistake. I got $30,000 instead of $300,000. I took a deep breath. What? That's impossible. Check it. Check it now. Let me pull up the transaction details. I pretended to type, waited 30 seconds. Oh no. What? What is it? Vivian, did you read the liquidation provisions in the trust documents? Silence. Then, what are you talking about? Check page 83, the addendum you signed. Vivian showed up at my office an hour later, wild-eyed and clutching the trust documents. She'd finally read them. The penalty clause was highlighted in yellow. 90%? 90%? I told you there was a steep penalty, I said calmly. You said it was standard. 10 or 15%. I said it depended on various factors. You chose not to review the documents carefully. She slammed her hands on my desk. You did this on purpose. I set up the trust exactly as designed. You signed it without reading it. You withdrew funds despite my warnings. I met her eyes. This is on you, Vivian. She hired a lawyer that same day. 2 days later, he called to confirm what I already knew. The LAD trust was legally sound. The penalty was valid. There was nothing she could do about the lost $270,000. Vivian decided to leave the remaining money alone. I'll wait out the 12 months, she told me coldly. I won't make that mistake again. I said nothing, because 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one from Mr. Finch, the estate lawyer. It was addressed to both of us. Due to the early liquidation event in the Legacy Asset Deferral Trust, the state requires an immediate reappraisal of the entire estate. Additionally, a mandatory 15% estate tax, previously deferred, is now due within 60 days. The amount? $2.2 million. I read the letter twice. This wasn't part of my plan. This was real. A consequence of the trust structure I'd created, triggering a legitimate state tax that Vivian couldn't avoid. And she had no liquid funds to pay it. The money was locked in the trust. Vivian called, crying this time instead of screaming. I can't pay $2 million. I don't have it. The trust has the funds, I said. Then get it out. If you withdraw more money, you'll trigger the penalty clause again. I don't have a choice, her voice cracked. If I don't pay the state tax, they'll seize everything, the house, the properties, all of it. I stayed silent. Audrey, please, help me figure this out. But there was no way out. The trap had teeth she hadn't seen. The state tax was real, legally required, and unavoidable. If she paid it, she'd lose 90% of whatever she withdrew. If she didn't pay it, the state would take everything. Either way, the inheritance was slipping through her fingers like water through a sieve. Vivian liquidated $2 million from the trust to cover the state tax and legal fees. I watched the transaction process, knowing exactly what would happen. $2 million withdrawn, 90% penalty applied, $1.8 million vanished into fees and penalties. $200,000 reached Vivian's account. It wasn't enough to cover the full tax bill. She had to liquidate more. Another $1 million withdrawn, 90% penalty, $900,000 gone. The cycle continued, each withdrawal triggering the penalty, each penalty requiring another withdrawal. The trust balance dropped steadily. $3 million, $2 million, $1 million. Vivian was caught in a death spiral of her own making, trapped by the same greed and impatience that had led her to sign the documents without reading them in the first place. By the end of the month, Vivian had withdrawn nearly $12 million from the trust. The penalties consumed $10.8 million. She'd paid the state tax, the legal fees, and the emergency costs for her failing yoga studio. And now the trust balance showed $500,000. Not enough to wait out the remaining months. Not enough to avoid more penalties. She called one final time. I need to close the trust, withdraw everything that's left. The penalties will apply, I warned. I know. Her voice was hollow. Just do it. I processed the final withdrawal. $500,000 became $50,000 after penalties. $15 million gone. The inheritance Dad had left her, consumed by the very mechanism I'd created to punish her impatience. I ran the final calculations on a Saturday morning. Total inheritance, $15 million. Total penalties and fees, $13.2 million. Total state and federal taxes, $1.5 million. Total remaining, $300,000, which Vivian had immediately spent on her failing business. Net result, $0. The LAD trust showed a balance of $0.00. Vivian's inheritance had been completely consumed by her own greed, her own impatience, her own refusal to read the documents she signed. I'd given her every warning. I'd told her the penalties were steep. I'd advised her to wait, but she couldn't, and now she had nothing. I closed my laptop and stared out the window. The satisfaction I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. Vivian appeared at my office on a Monday morning. Security tried to stop her, but she pushed past them. She threw the trust documents on my desk, papers scattered everywhere. You destroyed me, she said. Her eyes were red, her designer clothes wrinkled. You knew exactly what would happen. I looked at her steadily. I set up a legal trust. You signed it without reading it. You withdrew money despite my warnings. You did this to yourself, Vivian. Because you manipulated me. No, because you were greedy and impatient. Because you thought you could take everything Dad left without consequences. I stood up. You cut me out of the will. You gloated about it. You told me I was too soft to handle money. I picked up the penalty addendum. This was page 83. You never even looked at it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd won, technically. Vivian had nothing. The inheritance she'd stolen was gone. But I felt no triumph, just a deep, aching sadness. I'd destroyed my sister, the last connection to my family. Was revenge worth this emptiness? I lay awake until dawn, questioning everything. But when morning came, I got up. I went to work. I moved forward. And that afternoon, Mr. Finch called. Audrey, I need to inform you of something your father established years ago, a separate education fund set up when you started college. My heart skipped. He stipulated that if his primary will was ever contested or mismanaged, this fund would convert into a legacy trust for you. $500,000. I sat down slowly. Dad had known. He'd protected me all along. I didn't win millions. But I won something more valuable. Proof that I'd been valued. That my 5 years of care mattered. That being soft didn't mean being weak. Vivian lost everything. I lost sleep. but I gained myself back.